I'm Sarah, and I'm 32. My phone buzzes in my pocket, but I ignore it as my mother's words echo in my mind. You have nothing to be thankful for this year, so stay away so you don't bring shame to our family. She said it like she was commenting on the weather, standing in her pristine kitchen, not even looking at me while arranging flowers. The same kitchen where I'd helped her prepare countless holiday dinners that I was now banned from attending. I kept my expression neutral, gathered my car keys, and walked out without a word. What else was there to say? But here's something my dear mother doesn't know. I won $140 million in the lottery 2 weeks ago, and I've been keeping it secret, planning to announce it during Thanksgiving dinner as my gift to the family. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt unappreciated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Now let me tell you how I got to this point. It all started 6 months ago when I lost my job at the marketing firm. Corporate restructuring, they called it. Reality? They needed a scapegoat for the Peterson account disaster that wasn't even my fault. My boss Derek had been taking credit for my work for months, and when things went south, guess who got thrown under the bus? My family's reaction was predictably supportive. My mother suggested I move back home temporarily. Just until you get back on your feet, dear. Though I do think this might be a sign to reconsider your career choices. My sister Emma, who works for our father's construction company, helpfully pointed out that I could always answer phones in their office. It's not beneath you, Sarah. We all have to start somewhere. My brother Michael's contribution was even more encouraging. Maybe this is the universe telling you to settle down and focus on finding a husband instead of chasing these unrealistic career goals. The universe, it seemed, had different plans. I found a job at a smaller firm within 3 weeks, making only slightly less than before. But by then, the damage was done. I had become the family's cautionary tale, the one who couldn't quite get her life together. Family dinners became exercises in patience as they peppered me with advice about networking, interview skills, and the importance of having realistic expectations. My cousin Rachel, who married rich at 23 and hadn't worked a day since, was particularly fond of suggesting I consider becoming a teacher. Such noble work, and the schedule would give you time to focus on your personal life. The lottery tickets were my small rebellion. Every Friday, I'd stop at Murphy's Corner store and buy $10 worth of tickets. It was my tiny middle finger to their practical, predictable world. They mocked it relentlessly. Dad would lecture me about probability theory, while Mom would sigh about my gambling problem. But that Friday in early November changed everything. I was sitting in my small apartment, Chinese takeout containers scattered across my coffee table, checking my numbers against the winning combination. The first number matched, then the second. By the 5th match, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the ticket. $140 million. I must have stared at that ticket for an hour, checking and rechecking. Then I did what any rational person would do. I called in sick the next day, drove to the lottery office, and claimed my prize. After taxes, I was looking at approximately $85 million in my bank account. The first few days were surreal. I went to work, sat in my cubicle, and pretended nothing had changed while my bank balance showed more zeros than I could properly comprehend. I bought the same lunch, drove the same route home, and watched Netflix on my second-hand couch. But slowly, plans began forming. I would surprise my family at Thanksgiving dinner. I'd announce my win and share my fortune with them. Perhaps my mother would finally see that I wasn't the failure she'd painted me as. Maybe my siblings would look at me with respect instead of pity. I started making lists, pay off Emma's mortgage, set up college funds for Michael's kids, help Mom and Dad retire comfortably, buy the lake house we'd always talked about but could never afford. For weeks, I walked around with this secret burning inside me, imagining their faces when I revealed the truth. The shock, the joy, the realization that the family disappointment had become their salvation. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, they'd been telling me to get my life together, and now I had enough money to help all of them get their lives together too. But fate, as I was about to learn, has a twisted sense of humor. Last Tuesday, I decided to test the waters. I stopped by Mom's house unannounced, something I'd been doing less frequently since losing my job. She was in her garden, wearing those ridiculous flamingo print gloves she'd gotten for her birthday. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be job hunting." I smiled, ignoring the barb. "Actually, work's been going really well. We landed a huge client last week." She barely looked up from her roses. "That's nice, dear. Did you need something?" This was my opening. I was thinking about Thanksgiving. Maybe I could help more this year. Contribute financially to the dinner? Now I had her attention. She straightened up, studying me with that expression she reserved for checking if milk had gone sour. Contribute how exactly? Sarah, honey, you just got this new job. You should be saving every penny. I've been doing better than I let on, Mom. I could cover the whole dinner if you wanted. Make it really special this year. The skepticism on her face was almost comical. She actually laughed. Oh, sweetheart. A grocery store turkey and some side dishes would probably stretch your budget enough. Leave the planning to the adults. The adults. I was 32 years old, and she was talking to me like I was 12 and offering to pay for dinner with my allowance money, but I pressed on. What if I told you I could afford more than you think? What if I said I wanted to take the whole family somewhere special for Thanksgiving? Sarah. Her voice had that patronizing tone that made my teeth ache. I appreciate the thought, I really do. But let's be realistic about your situation. You're still recovering from that job loss, you're living in that tiny apartment, and you drive a car that's older than some people's children. She pulled off her gardening gloves with theatrical precision. The last thing this family needs is you going into debt trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. We love you exactly as you are. As I am, the perpetual underachiever. The one they had to love because family obligation demanded it, not because I brought anything valuable to the table. I left without pressing further. But the seed was planted. Maybe the surprise revelation at Thanksgiving wasn't the gift I thought it would be. Maybe it was the only way they'd ever see me differently. The following weekend, I attended my nephew's soccer game. Michael and his wife Stephanie were there, along with Emma and her husband Josh. Normal family stuff, except nothing felt normal anymore. I sat in my folding chair, surrounded by people who knew me as struggling Sarah, while my bank account held enough money to buy the entire soccer complex. Aunt Sarah! My nephew Tommy ran over after the game, grass stains on his uniform and pure joy on his face. Did you see my goal? I saw it. That was amazing. I ruffled his hair, and for a moment, everything felt simple again. Mom says you might not come to Thanksgiving this year because you're too busy with your new job. He looked concerned. But you have to come. It's tradition. I glanced over at Emma, who was very pointedly not looking in my direction. Interesting. They were already managing expectations, preparing for my absence. The family disappointment couldn't even be counted on to show up for holidays anymore. I'll be there, buddy, I promise. But even as I said it, I could feel the web of their low expectations tightening around me. They'd rather have me not come at all than risk me somehow embarrassing them or failing to meet their standards. That evening, I sat in my tiny apartment, thanks Mom, and tried to imagine how different that soccer game would have been if they knew the truth. Would Tommy still run to me with the same uncomplicated affection? Would Emma still avoid eye contact? Would Michael still make jokes about my ancient Honda? The money was supposed to be freedom, but it was starting to feel like a test. A way to measure exactly how little my family thought of me when they believed I had nothing to offer. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Charlotte, my college roommate and the only person who knew about the lottery win, had been telling me to be careful about my family's reaction. Money changes everything, Sarah. Don't expect it to fix relationships that were already broken. But I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was trying to prove something. The question was whether I was proving it to them or to myself. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to the car dealership and paid cash for a brand new Mercedes SUV. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see if anyone in my family would notice. If they'd wonder how the struggling one suddenly had a car that cost more than most people's houses. I parked it in my usual spot at work and waited. It took 3 days for Emma to call. Mom saw your new car at the grocery store. She's worried you've done something financially irresponsible. Like what? I kept my voice level. Like gotten into debt trying to keep up appearances. Sarah, we know you're embarrassed about the job situation, but going into debt for a fancy car isn't the answer. There it was. Even faced with evidence that maybe, just maybe, I was doing better than they assumed, their first instinct was to assume I was making poor choices. The idea that I might actually be successful was so foreign to them that financial irresponsibility seemed more likely. What if I told you I paid cash for it? Emma laughed. Actually laughed. Sarah, come on, we're family. You don't have to lie to impress us. After she hung up, I sat in my car, my beautiful, fully paid for car, and realized something important. The money wasn't going to change their opinion of me. It was going to challenge it. And people don't like having their fundamental beliefs challenged, even when those beliefs are cruel. Especially when those beliefs are about someone they're supposed to love. The confrontation happened exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving. I decided to try one more time, to give my mother a chance to see me differently before I played my trump card. I arrived at her house with expensive wine and fresh flowers from the upscale florist downtown. Small signals that maybe their struggling daughter was doing better than they thought. She accepted both with polite gratitude and no curiosity about how I could afford them. We were sitting in her living room when she casually mentioned that they might need to simplify Thanksgiving this year. Money's been tight with your father's reduced hours, and Emma's mortgage payment went up. We're thinking maybe just immediate family, something low-key. This was my opening. Mom, what if I told you money wasn't an issue? What if I said I wanted to host Thanksgiving this year at a nice restaurant, my treat? She set down her coffee cup with the careful precision of someone trying not to say something hurtful. Sweetheart, that's a lovely thought, but we both know you can't afford that. There's no shame in your situation, but let's not pretend it's something it's not. What if I can afford it? What if things have changed recently? Her expression shifted from patronizing to concerned. Sarah, please tell me you haven't done anything foolish. If you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not in trouble, Mom. I'm trying to tell you that I'm doing well. Really well. She studied me with the intensity of someone trying to diagnose a mental health episode. Honey, I drive past your apartment building twice a week. I know what those places cost. Your car might be new, but anyone can lease nowadays. What's really going on here? The frustration bubbled up before I could stop it. Why is it impossible for you to believe that I might actually be successful? Why is your first assumption always that I'm lying or in trouble or making poor choices? Because I'm your mother, and I know your situation. I know what you make at that little firm. I know what your rent costs, and I know you've never been particularly good with money. This sudden claim of wealth is concerning. Concerning. My potential success was concerning to her. What would it take for you to believe me? She sighed. And in that sigh was every conversation we'd ever had about my limitations, every subtle and not so subtle expression of disappointment, every comparison to my more successful siblings. Sarah, I think this conversation is getting away from us. Why don't we talk about something else? But I couldn't let it go. Answer the question, Mom. What would it take? She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but devastating. Honestly, I think you're struggling more than you want to admit, and you're creating fantasies to cope. It's not unusual for people in your situation. My situation. The eternal underachiever situation. The disappointment situation. The burden situation. My situation? You lost your job, you're barely making ends meet, you're single at 32 with no real prospects. It's a lot of stress, and sometimes people create elaborate stories to make themselves feel better. I stood up slowly, grabbing my purse. I see. Don't be dramatic, Sarah. I'm trying to help you face reality. Oh, I'm facing reality, Mom. More clearly than I have in years. I was at the door when she delivered the final blow. Before you go, there's something else we need to discuss about Thanksgiving. I turned back, hoping against hope that this was where she'd soften, where she'd invite me to prove her wrong about my circumstances. I've been talking with Emma and Michael, and we think it might be best if you don't join us this year. The words hit like physical blows. What? It's not personal, sweetheart. It's just that, well, you've been going through a difficult time, and holidays can be stressful. We're worried about you making a scene or getting emotional about your situation. My situation again. We love you, but you have nothing to be thankful for this year, and frankly, your presence might bring down the mood. Maybe it's better if you stay away so you don't bring shame to the family. There it was. The complete rejection, wrapped in concern and delivered with a smile. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't reveal the truth about the lottery ticket that could have changed all of their lives. I simply nodded and walked out. Because in that moment, I realized something important. They didn't want me to succeed. They needed me to be the family failure. It gave them someone to look down on, someone to feel superior to, someone to pity and manage. My success would threaten the entire family dynamic they'd built around my inadequacy. As I sat in my expensive car in her driveway, something crystallized in my mind. The money wasn't going to fix this relationship, but it could certainly end it on my terms. And maybe it was time they learned that the daughter they'd dismissed so casually wasn't as powerless as they believed. Have you ever felt like your own family needed you to fail? How do you handle people who can't accept that you might be more than they think you are? Let me know in the comments below. That night, I called Charlotte. She answered on the second ring, probably hearing something in my voice because her greeting was cautious. What happened? I told her everything. The uninvitation to Thanksgiving, my mother's assessment of my mental state, the complete dismissal of any possibility that I might have succeeded. I'm not surprised, Charlotte said when I finished. I've been watching your family treat you like the designated failure for years. But they don't know about the money yet. This is how they see me when they think I have nothing. Exactly. Which tells you everything you need to know about their love. Charlotte had always been direct, sometimes brutally so, but she was also the only person who'd never treated me like I was less capable than anyone else. I've been thinking, I continued, maybe I shouldn't tell them about the lottery at all. Now you're talking sense. What if I just disappeared, started over somewhere else with a clean slate? There was silence on the line. Then, are you asking for permission or talking yourself out of it? Good question. I'd been raised to believe that family was everything, that blood relationships came with obligations that transcended treatment or respect. The idea of cutting ties completely felt both terrifying and liberating. I keep thinking about Tommy. And what about when Mom gets older? What kind of person abandons their family? The kind of person whose family abandoned them first, Charlotte said quietly. Sarah, they disinvited you from Thanksgiving because they were embarrassed by your existence. That's not love. That's not family. That's cruelty with a biological justification. She was right, but knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different things. The next few days passed in a strange haze. I went to work, came home to my apartment, and sat surrounded by furniture that suddenly seemed impossibly shabby next to my bank balance. I could afford anything I wanted. A penthouse downtown, a house in the hills, a condo in Paris. But I remained in my small space, living like someone who made $40,000 a year instead of someone worth $85 million. It felt like living a lie, but I wasn't sure which version was more authentic, poor Sarah or rich Sarah. On Saturday, I drove past the house where my family would be gathering for Thanksgiving. Emma's car was already there, along with Michael's SUV and the vehicles belonging to various aunts, uncles, and cousins. The full family gathering that I'd been excluded from for my own good. I parked across the street and watched through the front window as they moved around inside. Mom setting the table with her good china, Dad carving something in the kitchen, Emma arranging flowers. The picture of domestic harmony, unmarred by the presence of their struggling relative. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Rachel. Missing you at Thanksgiving prep. Hope you're doing okay. The performative concern was almost worse than open hostility. She knew I'd been uninvited, they all knew, but they'd maintain the fiction that this was my choice. My inability to handle family gatherings. I was about to drive away when Michael came outside to get something from his car. He saw me immediately, and for a moment we just stared at each other through our windshields. He walked over, and I rolled down my window. Sarah, what are you doing here? Just driving by. The lie came easily. Heading to the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Listen, about Thanksgiving? Don't worry about it, I understand. It's not personal. Mom's just worried about you, and she thought maybe a quiet holiday at home might be better. For who, Michael? Better for who? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. It would be better for them. More comfortable, less complicated. I hope you all have a wonderful time, I said, and I meant it. Really. As I drove away, I made a decision. I would attend a different kind of Thanksgiving dinner. One where my presence was wanted, where I wasn't a problem to be managed or a burden to be endured. I would take myself out to the most expensive restaurant in the city, order whatever I wanted, and toast my freedom from people who claimed to love me, but couldn't stand to be around me. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I'd planned, but it was the one I deserved. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop pretending that biology created obligations that superseded basic human dignity. The money in my account wasn't just financial freedom. It was the power to choose who deserved access to my life. My family had made their choice about whether I belonged at their table. Now I would make mine. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and drizzling, which felt appropriately dramatic for my first major holiday as an exile from my own family. I'd made reservations at Morrison's, the kind of restaurant where meals cost more than my family typically spent on groceries in a week. I dressed carefully in a new black dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Nothing too flashy, but expensive enough that I felt different wearing it. Like someone who belonged in places my family couldn't imagine accessing. Morrison's was surprisingly busy for Thanksgiving, filled with other people who'd opted out of traditional family gatherings for various reasons. Solo diners, couples, small groups who looked like they might be friends rather than relatives. My kind of people, apparently. The waiter seated me at a table by the window overlooking the city. Will anyone else be joining you today? No, just me. And I'd like to start with your best champagne. As I sat sipping champagne that cost more than I used to spend on a month of groceries, I found myself thinking about what my family was doing right now. Probably sitting around Mom's dining table, making small talk about work and weather, carefully avoiding any mention of my absence. Or maybe they were talking about me, expressing concern about my mental state, my financial delusions, my inability to accept reality. The wayward daughter who couldn't handle family gatherings anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Hope you're having a good day. Love you. The casual cruelty of it almost made me laugh. Love you, but not enough to include you. Love you, but not enough to believe in you. Love you, but not enough to treat you with basic respect. I turned my phone face down and focused on the menu. 7 courses of food that would cost more than most people's car payments. I ordered everything that appealed to me, including the wine pairings, because I could. Because for the first time in my adult life, money wasn't a consideration. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd excluded me for being too poor to fit their image of family success, while I sat in luxury they couldn't afford, paid for with money they'd never believe I had. Halfway through dinner, another text arrived, this time from Michael. Mom's worried about you spending Thanksgiving alone. Maybe we could grab coffee next week. Now they were worried. Now, when it was too late to include me, but not too late to assuage their guilt about excluding me, I typed back, thanks, but I'm not alone. Having a wonderful time. Which was true, in its way. I was having a wonderful time being treated like a valued customer, rather than a burden to be managed. The waitstaff was attentive without being patronizing. The sommelier explained wine pairings without talking down to me, and nobody questioned whether I could afford what I was ordering. It was refreshing to exist in a space where my worth wasn't constantly questioned or diminished. As I was finishing dessert, a chocolate souffle that probably cost more than my mother spent on her entire Thanksgiving dinner, my phone rang. Charlotte, how's your fancy solo Thanksgiving going? Better than expected. The food is incredible, and nobody's told me I'm delusional or concerning. Good for you. Are you ready for phase 2? Phase 2. We'd discussed this. The plan to gradually reveal my changed circumstances, not through dramatic announcements, but through subtle shifts that would force my family to confront their assumptions about me. I think so. I bought a house this morning. Charlotte nearly choked on whatever she was drinking. You what? Online auction, cash offer, 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield Heights. I figured I should stop living like I make what they think I make. Sarah, that's... She paused, probably calculating real estate prices in that neighborhood. That's a $2 million house. 2.3 actually, but it has everything I want. Pool, 3-car garage, and most importantly, it's in the kind of neighborhood where I'll never accidentally run into any of my relatives. The decision had been impulsive, made during the soup course when I realized I was tired of living down to their expectations. If they were going to treat me like a failure regardless of my actual circumstances, I might as well enjoy my success without their judgment. When do you move in? Next week. I'm hiring professional movers and decorators. The whole thing will be done before Christmas. And your family? We'll find out when they drive by my old apartment building and see someone else living there. It felt good to have agency, to make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what would least upset people who'd already decided I was a disappointment. After dinner, I drove through my old neighborhood one last time, past the house where my family was probably finishing their perfect, uncomplicated holiday dinner, past the apartment building where I'd lived like someone apologizing for taking up space. Tomorrow, I would start living like someone who belonged in the world, someone whose success wasn't a delusion or a source of concern, but simply a fact, someone whose worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to see it. The rain had stopped and city lights reflected off wet streets like scattered diamonds. Everything looked different from behind the wheel of my expensive car, on my way to my expensive dinner, carrying knowledge of my expensive house. Not just richer, more real, more myself. For the first time in years, I was thankful. Just not for the things my family would have expected. The week after Thanksgiving passed quietly. I took time off work to handle the house purchase and moving arrangements, telling my colleagues I was dealing with a family situation, which was true in its way. Moving day arrived with military precision. Professional movers packed my modest possessions while I supervised from my new marble foyer. The contrast was surreal, my secondhand furniture looking lost in rooms designed for much grander things. That afternoon, I went shopping. Not the careful, budget-conscious shopping I'd done for years, but the kind of shopping I'd only seen in movies. I bought furniture that cost more than cars, art that required its own insurance policies, and electronics that made my old television look like a museum piece. The decorator I'd hired, Maria Santos, who worked exclusively with wealthy clients, walked through the house with me, taking notes about my preferences. She treated me exactly like what I was, someone with unlimited resources and sophisticated taste. The bones of this house are magnificent, she said, running her hand along the crown molding. With your budget, we can create something truly spectacular. My budget. She said it like it was a given that I had one rather than a hopeful assumption about my financial capacity. It was refreshing to be seen accurately. That evening, I sat in my new living room, surrounded by expensive furniture that wouldn't be delivered for another week, and finally allowed myself to process what I'd done. I'd bought a house. Not just any house, but the kind of house that announced its owner's success to anyone who drove past. My family would find out eventually, probably when someone mentioned seeing me at the country club or noticed my address on holiday cards. Their reaction would be predictable: confusion, suspicion, and ultimately some explanation that allowed them to maintain their narrative about my limitations. Maybe I'd inherited money from a distant relative. Maybe I'd married someone wealthy in secret. Maybe I was renting the house and pretending to own it. Any explanation would be more believable to them than the truth, that I'd been successful all along, and they'd been too invested in my failure to notice. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Emma drove by your apartment today. The manager said you moved out? Where are you living now? I stared at the message for several minutes. This was the moment. I could ease them into the truth gradually, or I could let them continue wondering while I built my new life without their involvement. I typed back, found a better place. Don't worry about me. Her response came immediately. Sarah, I'm your mother. Of course I worry. What's the address? I'd like to see where you're living. The address. If I gave her my address, she'd drive by within hours. She'd see the house, the neighborhood, the 3-car garage with my Mercedes parked inside. She'd have to confront the fact that her concerning daughter was living better than any of them. Part of me wanted that confrontation, wanted to see her face when she realized how completely she'd misjudged my circumstances. But another part of me, the part that had learned to protect itself over years of subtle diminishment, wasn't ready for that conversation. I turned my phone off without responding. The silence felt powerful. For 32 years, I'd been available for their judgments, their advice, their management of my life. I'd accepted their assessments of my capabilities and their decisions about my place in the family hierarchy. But money, I was discovering, I didn't just buy things. It bought choices. The choice to engage or not engage. The choice to prove myself or not prove myself. The choice to accept their version of who I was or create my own. The next morning, I woke up in my new master bedroom, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden I owned. I made coffee in a kitchen that was larger than my entire previous apartment, then sat at a granite island that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Everything felt surreal but also inevitable. This was who I'd always been inside. Someone who deserved beautiful things and respectful treatment. The money hadn't changed me. It had simply allowed me to live authentically for the first time. My phone turned back on showed 7 missed calls from various family members and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Emma wondering why I wasn't answering. Michael asking if I was okay. Mom demanding to know where I was living. The concern that had been absent when they uninvited me from Thanksgiving was suddenly overwhelming now that I'd made myself unavailable for their management. I scrolled through the messages without responding to any of them. Let them worry. Let them wonder. Let them experience what it felt like to be excluded from someone else's life. As I sat in my beautiful new kitchen, drinking expensive coffee and reading concerned messages from people who'd shown me no concern when I needed it, I realized something important. I no longer needed their approval or their inclusion. I had something better. I had my own life, lived on my own terms, funded by my own success. And for the first time in years, that felt like more than enough. The revelation that would shatter their world was still coming, but it would come when I chose, on my terms, in my time. Not as a desperate attempt to prove my worth, but as a simple statement of fact. They had been wrong about me all along. The question wasn't whether they deserved to know the truth. The question was whether I wanted to give them the chance to be wrong about me again. 3 weeks passed in blissful radio silence. I'd established a routine in my new life. Morning coffee on my terrace overlooking the garden. Work at the firm where nobody knew about my windfall. Evenings in rooms that finally matched who I felt I was inside. My colleagues had noticed changes, of course. New clothes that fit better, a confidence in my voice during presentations, a willingness to speak up in meetings. But they attributed it to professional growth, not personal wealth. You seem different lately. Sarah, my boss Jennifer mentioned during our weekly check-in. More assured. If she only knew that I could buy the entire company with what I had left over after decorating expenses. But the family silence couldn't last forever. On a Tuesday evening, as I was arranging fresh flowers in my dining room, the doorbell rang. I looked through the security system's camera display and saw Emma standing on my front porch. looking nervous and slightly awed. She'd found me. I considered not answering. Let her stand there wondering. The same way I'd stood outside their Thanksgiving gathering, excluded and unwanted. But curiosity won. I needed to see how she'd explain my circumstances to herself. I opened the door, leaning casually against the frame. Emma, how did you find me? I hired someone. She was staring past me into the foyer, taking in the marble floors and crystal chandelier. Sarah, what is this place? My home. Would you like to come in? She followed me inside, her mouth slightly open as we walked through rooms that belonged in architecture magazines. The living room, with its custom furniture and original artwork. The kitchen, with its professional-grade appliances and granite surfaces. The dining room, where flowers that cost more than her weekly grocery budget sat in vases worth more than her car. Sarah. She stopped in the middle of my living room, turning in a slow circle. How is this possible? I settled into my favorite armchair Italian leather, custom-made, and gestured for her to sit on the sofa. She perched on the edge like she was afraid to touch anything. What do you mean? This house, this furniture, that car in the driveway. Her voice was getting higher. Where did this come from? I could have told her the truth then. Could have pulled out the lottery ticket. I still carried a photo of it in my wallet, and watched her face as reality rearranged itself around the sister she thought she knew. Instead, I smiled. I've been doing well. Doing well? She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. Sarah, this isn't doing well. This is wealthy. This is millionaire wealthy. Is it? My casual tone seemed to unsettle her more than dramatic revelation would have. She was expecting explanations, justifications, some story that would make sense of what she was seeing. Mom is going crazy. We all are. You disappeared, stopped answering calls, and now we find out you're living like this. Like what, Emma? Like someone who doesn't need us anymore. There it was, the real fear. Not that I was struggling, but that I wasn't. Not that I needed their help, but that I didn't. Their family dynamic depended on me being the one who needed management, guidance, financial assistance. I've never needed you, I said gently. I wanted to be included. There's a difference. She flinched like I'd slapped her. That's not true. We're family. Of course you need us. Do I? Because when you thought I was struggling, you uninvited me from Thanksgiving. When you thought I was delusional about money, you laughed at me. When you thought I was making poor choices, you decided I was too embarrassing to include in family gatherings. We were trying to help You were trying to manage a problem you thought I was. Now that I'm not a problem, you don't know how to relate to me. Emma stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked my pool. This doesn't make sense, Sarah. Your job, your salary, we know what you make. Do you? She spun around. Yes. We looked it up. Marketing associates at firms like yours make $40,000 to $50,000 a year. Even with promotions you couldn't afford. She gestured helplessly around the room. Maybe you don't know as much about my situation as you thought. The doubt was creeping into her expression. The same doubt that had flickered across Michael's face at the soccer game. Across Mom's when I'd tried to tell her I was doing well. Are you going to tell me how this happened, or are we going to keep playing games? I considered my options. This was the moment. I could maintain the mystery. Let them keep wondering and guessing and driving themselves crazy trying to explain what they were seeing. Or I could end their confusion with a simple revelation that would change everything. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of Emma's laughter when I'd suggested I could pay cash for a car. Maybe it was the echo of Mom's voice saying I had nothing to be thankful for. I won the lottery, I said finally. Emma blinked. Once, twice, then she started laughing. Oh, come on. Sarah, be serious. I am being serious. The lottery? Your Friday night tickets? Those scratch-offs you waste money on? She was still laughing, but it was becoming more forced. Sarah, the biggest prize you ever won was $20. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photo I'd taken of the winning ticket. Handed it to her without a word. The laughter died on her lips as she stared at the screen. The numbers, the date, the amount. $140 million. This isn't real. But her voice was barely a whisper. Check it yourself. November 2nd drawing. Those are the winning numbers. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the phone like it might change what it was showing her. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Fear. Not of me, but of what my success meant for the story they'd all been telling themselves about who I was and who they were in relation to me. How long have you known? Since the day after the drawing. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The timeline was sinking in. I'd known about the money when Mom uninvited me. I'd known when they were making jokes about my financial delusions. I'd known when they decided I was too much of a failure to include in family gatherings. Sarah, Emma whispered, we had no idea. No, you didn't, because you never bothered to find out. What do you think will happen when the rest of the family finds out about Sarah's secret? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Emma left 20 minutes later, clutching my phone number and a promise that she wouldn't tell the rest of the family until I was ready. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes as she walked to her car, a 10-year-old Honda, that suddenly looked very different parked in my circular driveway. I didn't believe for a second that she'd keep my secret. Emma had never kept a secret in her life, and this was too big, too shocking, too fundamental to everything our family believed about itself. I was right. My phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. Sarah Elizabeth, you answer this phone right now. Mom's voice was shrill, barely controlled. Emma told me the most ridiculous story and I want to hear the truth from you. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the message while sipping my morning coffee. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this has gone far enough. Claiming you won the lottery? Living in some mansion you probably can't afford? Sarah, I'm worried about your mental state. Call me back immediately. The second call came from Michael 10 minutes later. Hey Sarah, it's me. Emma's telling some pretty wild stories about you hitting the jackpot. Look, if you need help with gambling addiction or debt problems, we can figure something out. Just call me back, okay? Gambling addiction. Because winning the lottery was less believable to them than me having a pathological relationship with scratch-off tickets. The third call was from Dad. His approach was different, more analytical, less emotional. Sarah, your mother is very upset about this lottery story. I've been doing some research and the odds of winning that jackpot were approximately 292 million to 1. I think we need to have a family meeting to discuss what's really going on here. A family meeting. To discuss my delusions, no doubt. To stage an intervention for the daughter who'd lost touch with reality so completely that she was living in fantasy mansions and claiming impossible windfalls. I didn't call any of them back. Instead, I went to work, where Jennifer complimented my new bracelet, a understated piece that had cost more than most people's cars, and asked if I'd consider taking the lead on the Henderson account. You've really come into your own lately, she said. There's a confidence about you that clients respond to. Confidence. Interesting how having $85 million could affect one's professional demeanor. That afternoon, I made a decision. If my family wanted a meeting, they could have one. But it would be on my terms, in my space, with full disclosure of the truth they were so determined to deny. I sent a group text to all of them. Family meeting Sunday at 2 p.m. My house, address attached, come prepared to apologize. The responses were immediate and predictable. Mom, Sarah, we're coming to help you, not to apologize for being concerned about your well-being. Michael, what's this address? This isn't your apartment. Emma, should I bring anything? Dad, I'll be there. We need to get to the bottom of this situation. Only Emma's response suggested she might actually believe what she'd seen. The others were clearly planning an intervention. Perfect. Sunday morning, I prepared my house like a stage set. I arranged the lottery ticket, the actual physical ticket, on my dining room table, along with bank statements, the deed to my house, and purchase receipts for my car. Everything they would need to accept the reality they were so determined to reject. I dressed carefully in a simple but expensive outfit, nothing flashy, but everything clearly high quality. I wanted to look successful, not like someone having a manic episode. At exactly 2 o'clock, cars began pulling into my driveway. I watched from my living room window as they climbed out, staring up at my house with expressions ranging from confusion to concern to something that might have been envy. Mom was the first to ring the doorbell. She entered my foyer like she was walking into a crime scene, her eyes darting around as if looking for evidence of whatever con game she was convinced I was running. Sarah, whose house is this really? Mine, Mom. Welcome. The others filed in behind her dad with his analytical expression, Michael looking uncomfortable, Emma trying to appear supportive while clearly struggling with her own shock. I led them to my living room, where they perched uneasily on furniture worth more than their annual salaries. Well, Dad said, pulling out a small notebook, I think we should start with some basic questions about your financial situation. I gestured to the dining room table. All your questions are answered over there. They followed me to the table, where I'd laid out the evidence like exhibits in a court case. Mom picked up the lottery ticket first, examining it with the intensity of someone looking for forgery evidence. This could be fake. Check the numbers online, I said calmly. Dad was already pulling out his phone, comparing the ticket numbers to the official lottery website. His expression shifted from skepticism to confusion to something approaching shock. These are the actual winning numbers. Michael grabbed the bank statements, scanning the balance column. His face went pale. Sarah, this shows $85 million after taxes. Yes. The silence that followed was profound. They sat around my dining room table, a table that cost more than any of their cars, staring at evidence that their fundamental assumptions about me had been completely wrong. Mom was the first to speak, her voice barely audible. How long have you known? Since November 3rd, the day after the drawing, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The implications hit them in waves. I could see it on their faces as they remembered conversations, decisions, dismissals that had happened after I'd become one of the wealthiest people in the state. You knew, Emma whispered. When we uninvited you from Thanksgiving, you knew. I knew. When Mom said you had nothing to be thankful for, I knew. When we laughed about your delusions about being wealthy, I knew. The weight of their behavior settled over the room like fog. Every patronizing comment, every dismissal, every assumption about my limitations, all of it had happened while I possessed the means to change all of their lives forever. Dad cleared his throat, his analytical mind trying to process the new information. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? I tried to. Remember, Mom? I tried to tell you I was doing well, that I could afford nice things, that I wanted to contribute to Thanksgiving dinner. Your response was to question my mental health. Mom's face had gone ashen. We didn't know. No, you didn't. Because you never considered the possibility that I might actually be successful. It was easier to believe I was delusional than to admit you might have been wrong about me. The confession hung in the air between us, changing everything and nothing at the same time. Because now came the real test. What would they do with the truth? The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. 4 people who had spent years managing my limitations now faced the reality that I had no limitations to manage. Mom was the first to recover, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked almost like calculation. Well, this changes things, doesn't it? Does it? Of course it does. Sarah, you're family. We've always supported each other through everything. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Supported each other? You know what I mean. We stick together. That's what families do. Michael cleared his throat. Sarah, I know this is probably overwhelming having this kind of windfall. We should talk about how to handle it responsibly. There it was. They'd moved from denying my success to managing it in the span of 5 minutes. Handle it how, exactly? Well, you'll need financial advisors, investment strategies. Dad has some experience with portfolio management from his retirement planning. I looked at my father, whose retirement portfolio probably totaled less than I spent on furniture last week. Is that right, Dad? I think Michael has a point. This kind of money requires careful stewardship. There are tax implications, investment considerations. I'm sure there are. Emma leaned forward eagerly. We could help you research the best financial planners in the city. Make sure you don't get taken advantage of by someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. The irony was thick enough to cut. They were worried about other people taking advantage of me. That's thoughtful of you, I said evenly. Mom was warming to the theme. And you'll want to be careful about who you tell. Word gets out about something like this, and suddenly everyone's your best friend, you know? People will come out of the woodwork asking for money. People will ask for money, I repeated. Oh, absolutely. You have to be firm about boundaries. Family is different, of course, but strangers, acquaintances, even friends, they'll all have their hands out. How is family different? She looked confused by the question. Well, we look out for each other. We share. That's what family means. I stood up, walking to my kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. They watched me move through my space with new eyes, probably calculating what everything cost, what my daily life looked like now, what it meant for them. Sarah, Dad said when I returned, we owe you an apology. Here it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Moment? For what? For not believing in you, for not seeing your potential, he gestured helplessly, for treating you like you weren't capable of great things. I appreciate that. And we want to make it up to you, Michael added quickly. However we can. How would you make it up to me? Well, we could... there are ways families can be closer, more involved in each other's lives. Emma nodded enthusiastically. We could have regular dinners again, maybe here since you have such a beautiful dining room. And holidays, Mom added. You could host holidays now. Christmas here would be magical with all this space. They were rewriting our entire relationship in real time, casting themselves as the loving family who had always been there for me, just waiting for the right moment to show their true colors. "What about Emma's mortgage?" I asked casually. Emma's face lit up. "What about it? You mentioned it was causing stress for the family, making Thanksgiving difficult to afford?" "Oh, well, I mean, if you were thinking about helping with that, it would certainly be appreciated, but I wouldn't want to presume. And Michael, how are things with the kids' college funds?" His expression brightened. "Actually, Sarah, since you bring it up, we've been worried about how to afford tuition for both kids. If there were a way to ensure they could go to good schools without crushing debt? And Mom, Dad, retirement planning must be stressful on your current income." Mom leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibility. "It has been challenging, living on your father's reduced hours. But we've always made do." They were all leaning toward me now, like plants turning toward the sun. The family that had found me too embarrassing to include at Thanksgiving was suddenly very interested in inclusion. "It sounds like everyone has financial pressures that my windfall could address." "We're not asking for anything," Dad said quickly. "But if you wanted to help your family, we'd be grateful." "Of course you would." Something in my tone must have alerted them because the eager expressions became slightly more cautious. "Sarah," Mom's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "I'm just trying to understand something. When you thought I had nothing, I was too much of a burden to include in family gatherings. Now that I have everything, suddenly family support and togetherness are important priorities." "It's not like that," Emma protested. "Isn't it? 3 weeks ago you were concerned about my mental health because I claimed to be doing well financially. Today you're making plans for how I should spend my money on the family." "We're not making plans. You absolutely are making plans. College funds, mortgage payments, retirement support. You've gone from managing my poverty to managing my wealth in one afternoon." The silence returned, heavier this time. "Sarah," Mom said carefully, "I understand you're hurt about Thanksgiving." "I'm not hurt about Thanksgiving, Mom. I'm educated by it." "What do you mean?" "I mean I learned something valuable about who you all are when you think I have nothing to offer. And I'm learning something equally valuable about who you are when you think I have everything to give." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "We've always cared about you, Sarah. Money doesn't change that." "You're right. Money doesn't change anything. It just reveals what was already there. And what had been revealed wasn't pretty." But we weren't done yet. The real test was still coming. They left that afternoon with promises to talk soon and suggestions for family planning sessions to discuss how to handle this blessing responsibly. The transformation from concerned intervention to eager financial planning committee had been seamless. Over the next week, my phone became a constant source of entertainment. Text messages arrived daily, each more transparent than the last. From Mom. "Saw a great article about charitable giving strategies for lottery winners. Would love to discuss some worthy causes that are close to our family's heart." From Michael. "Been thinking about what you said. Maybe we should look into setting up family trusts. For tax purposes, of course." From Emma. "Found the perfect financial planner. She specializes in sudden wealth syndrome. Very discreet." The speed at which they'd pivoted from concern to self-interest was almost impressive. But I wasn't ready to let them off the hook yet. There was one more test I needed them to fail. I called Charlotte that Friday evening, sitting on my terrace with a glass of wine that cost more than my family used to spend on Christmas presents. "How did the big reveal go?" "Exactly as you predicted. Shock, followed immediately by strategic repositioning to maximize benefit from my newfound resources. Are you surprised?" "Not even a little. But Charlotte, I need to try something. One final experiment. I don't like the sound of that. What if I told them I was thinking about giving it all away?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "That's either brilliant or cruel." "Maybe both. But I need to know. Do they love me? Or do they love what I can do for them?" "Sarah, you already know the answer to that question." She was right. But I needed them to know the answer too. I needed them to see themselves clearly, the same way they'd forced me to see myself for so many years. The next morning, I sent out another group text. "Family meeting Sunday, important announcement about my plans for the money." This time, they all responded within minutes, confirming attendance with an eagerness that would have been flattering if it weren't so transparent. Sunday afternoon, they assembled in my living room again, but the dynamic was completely different. They were relaxed now, comfortable in my space, already acting like stakeholders in my decision-making process. Mom had even brought a notebook. "So," Dad said, settling into my expensive sofa like he belonged there, "what did you want to discuss?" "I've been doing some thinking about the money, about what to do with it." "That's smart," Emma said approvingly, taking time to make good decisions. "And I've realized something important. This money, it's not really mine. They all leaned forward, suddenly very attentive. I mean, I didn't earn it. It was just luck, random chance. And I keep thinking about all the people who could use this money more than I can. People like who? Michael asked carefully. Charities, foundations, people who are actually struggling, not just someone who bought a lucky ticket at Murphy's corner store. The silence was profound. I watched their faces as they processed what I was suggesting. The charitable giving advice was fine when it involved small percentages. Giving away everything was apparently a different conversation. Sarah, Mom said slowly, that's very generous of you to think about others. But you have to be practical too. Practical how? Well, you need to take care of yourself first. Make sure you're secure. And then there's family to consider. Family? We've all been struggling in different ways. If you have the ability to help the people who love you most, the people who love me most, she nodded earnestly. Your father and I have worked so hard our entire lives. We deserve to retire comfortably. Emma and Michael have children to think about. Their futures, their education. And what about the children who don't have aunts who won the lottery? Of course, those children matter too, but charity begins at home. Sweetie, Michael jumped in. Sarah, think about it logically. You give this money to strangers, and you'll never know if it's actually helping anyone. But if you help us, you can see the direct impact. You know the money is going to good people who will use it responsibly. Good people. People who love you, Emma added quickly. People who will always be grateful for what you've done. And if I give it all away to charity instead? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. That would be, Dad paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. Financially irresponsible. You'd be leaving yourself vulnerable. And your family, too. My family would be vulnerable? Sarah, honey, Mom's voice took on the patient tone she used when explaining things to slow children. We've all been making plans based on your situation. Emma's been looking at houses in better school districts. Michael's been researching private schools for the kids. You've been making plans. Family plans, she corrected. Plans that include everyone being more comfortable and secure. What if I don't want to make those plans? The mask slipped just a fraction. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for someone who'd been watching for them her entire life. Sarah. Michael's voice carried a warning note. Don't make any hasty decisions you'll regret later. Like giving money to charity instead of family. Like throwing away an opportunity to really help the people who matter most. There it was. The naked self-interest they'd spent weeks disguising as family love and concern. And if I'm not convinced that you're the people who matter most? Mom's expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? It means that the people who matter most to me probably wouldn't have uninvited me from Thanksgiving dinner. They probably wouldn't have laughed at my claims of success. They probably wouldn't have spent years treating me like the family failure. Sarah, we've apologized for all that. You've apologized because it became inconvenient to have treated me badly. Not because you actually regretted it. The room was completely silent now. 4 people who'd spent 40 minutes explaining why they deserved my money more than starving children or homeless veterans or medical researchers. We're your family, Mom said finally, her voice tight. That has to count for something. It does count for something. Mom, it counts for exactly as much as it counted 3 weeks ago, when you decided I was too much of a disappointment to sit at your table. This is ridiculous. Michael stood up. Sarah, you're being emotional and vindictive. Am I? Or am I being exactly as practical as you are? What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm making family plans based on how people actually treat me, not how they say they feel about me. Emma was starting to look panicked. Sarah, please don't do anything drastic. We can work through this. Work through what exactly? This anger you're feeling, these trust issues, my trust issues. You're clearly still hurt about Thanksgiving, and I understand that. But destroying your family relationships over one misunderstanding isn't the answer. One misunderstanding. The casual dismissal of 32 years of subtle diminishment as a single misunderstanding was almost impressive in its audacity. Sarah, Dad said in his most reasonable tone, why don't we take a break from this conversation? Give everyone time to cool down. I'm perfectly cool, Dad. In fact, I've never been more clear-headed in my life. What does that mean? It means I've made my decision. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of anxiety across their faces. What decision? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. The decision about what to do with the money. And? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. And you'll find out soon enough. I waited until the following Friday to make my announcement, Not because I needed time to decide that decision had been made the moment they started making plans for my money, but because I wanted them to spend a week wondering what I'd chosen. The suspense was clearly eating at them. Daily phone calls, carefully casual text messages, increasingly desperate attempts to gauge my intentions. Mom even dropped by my office unannounced, claiming she was in the neighborhood, despite the fact that my office was 20 minutes from anywhere she normally went. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay after Sunday," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk like we were old friends catching up. "You seemed upset." "Did I?" "A little emotional, which is understandable given the stress you must be under with this kind of life change." "What kind of stress?" "Well, sudden wealth can be overwhelming. There are so many decisions to make, so many people offering advice. It's important to have people you trust helping you through it. People like her, presumably." "I appreciate your concern, Mom." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Sarah, I hope you haven't made any major financial commitments yet. These charity organizations can be very aggressive once they know someone has means." "Is that so?" "Oh, absolutely. They'll make you feel guilty like you're obligated to solve everyone else's problems. But the truth is, you can't save the world. You can only take care of the people who matter most." "And who matters most?" "Family, honey, the people who loved you before you had money and will love you after. That's how you know it's real." The irony was so thick I could have served it for dinner. "That's wise advice, Mom," she brightened. "I'm glad you think so. Your father and I have been married for 35 years. We've learned a few things about what really matters in life." After she left, I made a phone call to Charlotte, who answered with her usual directness. "How's the torture your family experiment going?" "It's not torture, it's education." "For them or for you?" "Good question." "Both, I think." "Are you ready to end this, Sarah? Because watching you play with people who've already shown you who they are isn't healthy for anyone." She was right. It was time to finish this. That evening, I made several important phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, confirming the paperwork I'd asked him to prepare. The second was to my financial advisor, authorizing the transfers I'd requested. The third was to a moving company, scheduling services for the following week. On Friday afternoon, I sent one final group text. "Family meeting Sunday at 2 p.m. Final announcement about the money. Please come on time." They arrived early, clustering in my living room with a nervous energy that filled the entire space. Mom had brought homemade cookies, a peace offering. Perhaps, or an attempt to remind me of family traditions and obligations. "Well," Dad said as soon as everyone was seated, "we're all here." I stood in front of them, looking at faces I'd known my entire life, but was seeing clearly for the first time. "I want to thank you all for coming, especially after everything that's happened over the past few weeks." "Sarah," Emma began, but I held up my hand. "I've made some decisions, and I wanted you to hear them from me directly." The tension was palpable. 4 people trying to look supportive while calculating how much money might be about to change hands. "First, I've decided what to do with the lottery winnings." Collective held breath. "I'm giving it all away." The silence was deafening. "All of it?" Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Well, not quite all. I'm keeping enough to maintain my current lifestyle and secure my retirement. But the rest, approximately $75 million, is going to charity." Mom's face had gone completely white. "Sarah, that's a very big decision." "It is. Maybe you should think about it a little longer." "I have thought about it. I've set up a foundation focused on supporting people who've been dismissed or underestimated by their families. People who need someone to believe in their potential when the people closest to them won't." The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Sarah," Dad said carefully, "what about your family? What about the people who have always supported you? What about them? After everything we've been through together, I think this is exactly the right decision." Emma was starting to tear up. "Sarah, please, I know we made mistakes, but we're your family. That has to count for something." "It does count for something, Emma. It counts for exactly what it's always counted for." "Which is what?" "Which is whatever you decide it's worth when you think I have nothing to give you." The words hung in the air like an indictment. "Sarah," Mom's voice was pleading now, "we've apologized. We've admitted we were wrong about you. What more do you want?" "I don't want anything from you, Mom. That's the point." "But we're your family. You're my biological relatives. There's a difference." "That's not true. We love you. You love what you thought I could do for you." "There's a difference there, too." Michael stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You're punishing us for one mistake." "One mistake?" "Thanksgiving." The misunderstanding about your financial situation. We've said we're sorry. The misunderstanding about my financial situation happened because you never bothered to actually know me. The Thanksgiving uninvitation happened because you were embarrassed by what you thought I was. We were trying to help. You were trying to manage a problem you thought I represented. When that problem turned into an opportunity, you pivoted to managing that instead. That's not fair, isn't it? 3 weeks ago, I was too much of a failure to sit at your dinner table. Today, you're making plans for how to spend my money. If that's not managing me like a resource instead of loving me like a person, what would you call it? None of them had an answer for that. Sarah, Emma tried one last time. Families forgive each other. That's what makes us family. You're absolutely right, Emma. Families do forgive each other. Hope flickered across their faces. But first, they have to apologize for the right things. And you're not apologizing for 32 years of treating me like I wasn't good enough. You're apologizing for the inconvenience of having been wrong about my bank balance. The hope died. I've also made another decision, I continued. I'm moving. Moving where? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Somewhere else. Somewhere I can build relationships with people who see my worth without needing a bank statement to convince them. Sarah, please. This house will be sold. The proceeds will go to the foundation, along with my car, most of my furniture, and anything else that might remind you of opportunities you've missed. They sat in stunned silence, watching their financial security evaporate in real time. You can't be serious, Michael said finally. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Sarah, Mom stood up, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd used when I was a child. You're making a terrible mistake. Family is forever. Money comes and goes. But family is a choice, Mom, not an obligation. And I'm choosing to invest my time, energy, and resources in people who chose to value me before they knew what I was worth. I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA but had never truly known me, had never tried to know me, had never believed I was worth knowing. I want you to leave now. Sarah, please leave my house. They gathered their things in shocked silence, moving like people in a dream who hadn't yet realized it was actually a nightmare. At the door, Mom turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Sarah. When you realize what you've thrown away, what you've lost. I haven't lost anything, Mom. I've finally figured out what I never actually had. She flinched like I'd struck her. But she didn't argue. After they left, I sat alone in my beautiful living room, surrounded by expensive things that had never made me feel as wealthy as I felt in that moment. Because wealth, I'd learned, wasn't about money. It was about knowing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserved from anyone, even especially the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. For the first time in my life, I felt truly rich. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, reading an email from my foundation's program director. We'd just approved funding for a scholarship program supporting young adults who'd been estranged from their families, kids aging out of foster care, LGBTQ youth rejected by religious parents, children of addicts who'd chosen recovery over enabling. The Harrison Foundation for Second Chances had funded 12 scholarships in its first quarter. 12 young people who would go to college despite having no family support, no safety net, no one to believe in their potential. It felt like the best money I'd ever spent. My phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting my reading. Charlotte, who'd moved to Portland with me after deciding she was tired of Boston winters. Lunch at 1? I have news. I smiled, gathering my laptop and papers. Real news from Charlotte was usually worth hearing. We met at our usual spot, a small bistro near the nonprofit office where I volunteered 3 days a week. Charlotte was already seated, practically vibrating with excitement. Okay, spill, I said, settling into the chair across from her. I ran into Kevin Thompson at the grocery store yesterday. Kevin Thompson. The name took me a moment to place. Then I remembered Michael's college roommate, someone I'd had a crush on for approximately 10 minutes when I was 19. And he's divorced, moved back to Boston last month, and asked about you. Asked what about me, where you were living, what you were doing, whether you were happy. I raised an eyebrow. Why would Kevin Thompson care whether I'm happy? Because apparently he's had a thing for you since college, but you were always so focused on what your family thought about everything that he figured you weren't interested in dating outside their approved circle. That's ridiculous. Is it? Sarah, you spent years trying to be the daughter your parents wanted instead of the person you actually were. Kevin saw that. He said he always admired how hard you tried to make them proud, but he could tell it was costing you pieces of yourself. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. What did you tell him? I told him you'd figured out who you were without their input, and that you were happier than I'd ever seen you. And? And he asked if it would be okay to get your number. I considered this. Dating hadn't been on my radar since the move. I'd been too busy figuring out how to live authentically, how to build friendships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation, how to use my resources to actually help people instead of just managing relationships. But maybe it was time to explore what it felt like to be valued by someone who had no agenda beyond enjoying my company. Give him my number. Charlotte grinned. Already did. Of course you did. My phone rang as if on cue. An unknown Boston number. That might be him, Charlotte said innocently. I answered, and Kevin's voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm, slightly nervous, genuinely pleased to hear from me. Sarah, it's Kevin Thompson. I hope it's okay that Charlotte gave me your number. It's fine. She said you'd move back to Boston. Yeah. Divorce finalized, new job, fresh start, the whole middle-aged cliche. He laughed, and the sound was unexpectedly comfortable. Charlotte said you'd move to Portland. I did. I needed some distance from Boston for a while. I can understand that. Listen, I know this might sound strange, but I was wondering if you'd be interested in having dinner sometime. I could fly out there, or if you're ever back in Boston, you'd fly to Portland for dinner? Sarah, I've been thinking about asking you out for approximately 15 years. A plane ticket seems like a small investment at this point. I laughed, surprised by how easy it felt to talk to him. No calculations about what he wanted from me, no careful management of his expectations. Just two adults having a conversation about the possibility of getting to know each other better. Tell me something, Kevin. What made you want to ask me out now? Honestly, Charlotte told me you'd stopped trying to be who other people wanted you to be and started being who you actually are. That's the person I was always interested in getting to know. It was a good answer. Maybe even a perfect answer. When can you get to Portland? How's next Friday? 3 days later, I was getting ready for what felt like my first real date in years. Not a date with someone my family approved of, not a date designed to check boxes on someone else's list of appropriate partners, but a date with someone who was interested in me as I actually existed. I chose a simple dress, expensive, but not obviously so, and met Kevin at a restaurant downtown. He looked older, more settled, but his smile was exactly the same as I remembered. You look, he paused, searching for words. You look like yourself, if that makes sense. It made perfect sense. Over dinner, we talked about everything except my family, my work with the foundation, his new job in sustainable architecture, our shared love of hiking, books we'd read, places we wanted to travel. Normal conversation between two people who enjoyed each other's company. Can I ask you something? Kevin said over dessert. Sure. Charlotte mentioned you'd had some kind of falling out with your family. I don't need details, but I want you to know I never understood how they treated you. What do you mean? Even in college, when Michael would complain about his dramatic sister, or your parents would make comments about your choices, I always thought they were missing something important about who you were. Which was what? That you were the most genuine person in that entire family. The only one who seemed to care more about being a good person than about looking successful. I stared at him across the table. This man who'd seen something in me that my own family had missed for 3 decades. Kevin? Yeah? I'm really glad Charlotte ran into you at the grocery store. He smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. So am I. 6 months after that first date, Kevin proposed during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. Not because I had money, he'd been genuinely shocked when I told him about the lottery, but because he said I was the person he wanted to build a life with. Even if you were broke? I'd asked, half joking. Especially if you were broke, he'd replied. Money's just money, Sarah. You're irreplaceable. We were married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends we'd chosen rather than relatives we'd inherited. Charlotte was my maid of honor. My foundation's program director officiated. The kids from our first scholarship class sent a group video message that made me cry happy tears. My family wasn't there. Not because I was still angry, but because anger had transformed into something more peaceful. Indifference. They'd shown me who they were when they thought I had nothing. I'd believed them. But this story isn't really about them. It's about learning that your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. It's about choosing to invest your time, energy, and love in people who value you for who you are, not what you can do for them. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who diminish you, especially when those people share your last name. The lottery ticket changed my bank balance, but learning to value myself changed my life. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth and building the life you actually want. Remember, You don't need to win the lottery to realize you deserve better than people who only see your value when it benefits them. And if you've ever had to choose between family approval and self-respect, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the family we choose is more loving than the family we're given. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps you write your own.